Hi, I'm retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page, where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books. They're $10 paperback or $2.99 ebook download, including Grand Theft Auto, the NYPD's Auto Crime Division. Backed by popular demand, we're lucky to have Vern Gebreth back to talk to us today. If you didn't watch last week's episode, Vernon is a retired lieutenant commander of the New York City Police Department's Bronx Homicide Task Force, which handled over 400 murder investigations a year. During his career, he was a detective, a precinct detective squad commander, temporary commander of the 7th Homicide Zone in the South Bronx, and commander of Bronx Homicide. He's also author of a great book, The Godfather of Homicide, Vernon J. Gebreth's A Cop's Cop. It's available on Amazon, and I suggest you give it a look. Vernon, how you doing today?
Doing wonderful. How you doing, Vic? I'm glad
I'm,
you're over your flu.
oh, we were just talking about that off
Yeah.
camera. It just hung around, hung around. I didn't feel like shaving. It's just like death itself. Vernon, you and I never crossed paths. As you retired the same year I was hired, I was in the police academy. But later on in my career, I worked in the same precinct that you were the squad commander, the 50 precinct. And while researching your career, I came up with a bunch of homicides that you worked on, and I'd like to talk to you about some of them.
Sure.
Well,
Which ones?
but before we get to the homicide, this one really interested me. You worked on a 1981 mugging of Sister Margaret Franks, who was left in a coma near her convent on Webb Avenue. Could you go into that
Yeah.
case?
Yeah, that came in around Christmas Eve. That was a horrible case. She almost died. And we put together a task force, and sadly, we never got the guy. We know he was a male black. We had a description. And I even went so far as to bring in a psychic into the case that used to hear called something called psychometry, where she could get a reading off a metal object. And I sent her the nun's keys to give me a reading on what happened. She described the mugging, she described the male black, she even described the body of water, and there was no way that this woman knew that we had the reservoir
Reservoir, yeah.
at that location. But sadly, we never solved the case. She lived. What's interesting about that case is I got to meet Donald Trump's father. That was the most interesting part of that case, besides the fact we couldn't solve it. Fred Trump, Donald Trump's father, was a philanthropist and a very well-known person. I never met him. I didn't know him. I got a call from my chief, Edwin Dreyer. He was a piece of work, boy. I tell you, he was the ultimate chief. He says, listen, Vernon, I want you to go to this businessman's house. He lives in Queens, and he wants to make a reward, but he doesn't want to tell anybody who gave the reward. He wants to remain anonymous. I says, no problem, chief. I went out to this nice house in Queens, right? And I don't know who Fred Trump is. He's a big shot. I don't know this. I'm a dopey detective sergeant from the Bronx. So he invites me in. Would you like to have a drink, Sergeant? I said, no, sir, I'm on duty. He said, well, how do we go about this? I said, well, I drew up a agreement that you're going to offer $5,000 for the identification and arrest of the person responsible for the attempted murder and mugging of this Catholic nun. He goes, what do I have to do? Just make the commitment, sign the paper. I went back, I notified DCPI. Next thing I know, I'm being besieged by all the crime reporters, and they're trying to extract who gave the reward. I won't move on it. I gave my word, that was it. Anyway, to make a long story short, the reward was never paid. But the interesting part of that case is now it's like, God knows how many years later, I'm retired and teaching across the country. Donald Trump tries to make a reward offer. So he calls up the police department. He gets involved with the legal division.
Oh.
What a bunch of schmucks. Anyway, it got so bad that Donald Trump called him up and said, listen, why don't you send that Detective Sergeant Gebbert to welcome my father? He did it 1, 2, 3. Now I get a call from this eunuch from the legal division, a lawyer, right? He goes, by whose authority did you authorize that reward? I says, by the authority vested me in common sense. You ever take business law, you jackass? We signed a letter of agreement. And that was it. So it was an interesting outcome.
Did the nun recover from her injuries?
Yes, fully recovered, thank God, a lot of praying going on. I felt very frustrated that we couldn't solve that case, but you see how I'm always thinking outside the
Oh
box. Who
yeah.
would bring in a psychic? I couldn't tell anybody I brought in a psychic because they didn't think I was a psycho. So,
Well, the funny thing is, years later, I'm in the 5-0 and I'm up in the squad one day, and I don't know if it was the same as when you were there, but on the wall, someone had taken manila folders and cut them and wrote phone numbers all around the walls, around the border of the wall on the ceiling. And I remember seeing Psychic. I'll never forget that. Like, of all the things, there's like Bronx robbery, DCPI, all these phone numbers, things that an investigator would need that you just look up and it's there, as opposed to back in the day, a Rolodex before
Rolodex,
phones and
yeah.
everything else. Another case I came across. Now, I was a car guy. The 5-0 precinct had several short stay motels. And as you and I both know, short stay motels, all sorts of nefarious things go on in there. And I would roll through there several times a tour and run plates. And sometimes you come back
That was a good place to do it. That was a good
right,
place
and
to do
you
it.
come up with a stolen vehicle. I'd park down the block, wait for the guy. You couldn't really trust the managers of those places. Sometimes they'd call up the room. The guy would go out the back window, and the car would sit. But anyway, I remember when I first got to the 5-0, I was going through the Deegan Motel parking lot on Bailey Avenue, and I remember an old timer telling me, he goes, there was a homicide here with an off-duty Yonkers cop years early. And I says, really? I never knew about that. And then while researching your career, I came across that.
Yeah, that was a horrible case. He was unarmed at the time. He had a second job to support his family, and in came these characters to do the robbery. He spotted them as robbers. He tried to close the door, and they shot him right through the door. And I don't know how much money they got. They didn't get much. He died at the hospital. Really sad case. We jumped on it right away. We formed a task force in the 5-0. I brought in people from Major Case, and the Yonkers Police Department offered a $10,000 reward. And we had a general idea that certain mutts in the neighborhood, okay, would target that hotel at different times. Like you said, some of the managers were nefarious.
Yeah.
But this guy was a straight shooter, John. And so what happens is we came up with a guy who was a pretty good suspect. We brought him in and we questioned him, and he had an alibi. He was at this club at Jerome Avenue. So we got to let him go. Now we're doing everything we can. We're bringing in informants. We're checking with people, we're offering the reward. To make a long story short, it took us 19 days to solve that case. I went to the funeral as a representative from the NYPD. I met the family. I promised them we'd do whatever we could. As it turned out, during the investigation, you know how detectives are great people. I was a detective, I know. Never tell a detective that he's wrong. Okay, I had two of my top detectives, one from Major Case, one from the 5-0 squad. They were at each other. They had different
Right.
theories, right? And boss, what do you think? I said, I don't think anything. Pursue it. Let them take the investigation, their theory to the ultimate, and they'll come back. And sure enough, the guy come back and says, yeah, I was wrong. I had this idea. That's great. I don't believe in micromanaging my detectives, okay? I believe in letting detectives detect. I'll come in when I have to as a boss, but I don't tell them what to think. Anyway, we're back to the same guy we picked up early because we broke his alibi. And he was one of our suspects. He was a Haitian, and his friend, who was also a Haitian, lived in Queens. And we got both of them, and they were under arrest for homicide.
Did they ultimately spill it?
Yes, the guy we brought in originally spilled it. The other guy got a lawyer. He lawyered up. He was indicted by the grand jury, and he showed up with his lawyer. But he was found guilty at the trial.
Like I said, an old timer told me that one
There's
time.
another part of that story I should tell you.
Go for it.
Every command I went to, I put in the Gebeth protocol for the first responders. I would address the outgoing platoon. I would give them sign-in sheets and things like that. Funniest thing in the world. You talked about these hotels like short-time guests. there was there was an off-duty cop in that hotel getting laid that night, and when the police responded, he tried to tin his way out. And he couldn't tin his way out because the Gebeth protocol was in effect. They said, no,
No,
this
no
guard
relief.
commander wants to talk to you. And he didn't know anything because he was too busy doing his business. But the bottom line was, my guys were so good, they wouldn't let anybody leave the hotel, even if they tried to tin their way out.
But he didn't see anything.
No, he was busy.
Another case I came across was a rape robbery that happened in the home of a Riverdale doctor. The perp called the perp, he calls the house, he speaks to the maid or the house cleaner, and he says he has to come over. He's a repairman to do repairs. And he later called the precinct to say he was leaving the stolen property that he had taken. I guess he felt guilty about what he had done, and he dropped the property off at Visitation Church.
I do remember that case, but he was never caught. We tried.
Really?
No, he was never caught. We put him out. We put out the thing that what he had done and how he had violated this girl. He actually called up and he apologized. He was an Irishman. He had a thick, very thick Irish accent, and he was probably from the neighborhood. So he was probably some renegade that was temporarily living there. We never got him. We never got him. But he confessed. And that poor girl, it was reported as a burglary. But while I was interviewing her, I knew there was something wrong. There was more to it than the burglary. And that's when she said he had tied her up and then he engaged in sex. And his story was that he got so excited when she was tied up that he had sex with her. So it was really a wild, wild case.
It's a shame. I mean, and nowadays with DNA, they could have indicted the DNA.
Absolutely. Don't forget, we didn't have DNA
Oh,
yet.
no. Listen, I'm not second guessing. I was fascinated. I remember when you had that Upper East Side rapist in the early 90s or mid 90s where they indicted the DNA. So basically, for those of you that don't know, when you indict somebody, it stops the clock. The statute of limitations on everything but murder is 5 years. Well, felonies.
Vic, I wish I had the tools they
Oh,
have
yeah.
today. Don't forget, I had the first DNA case in New York State when I was a lieutenant commander. I opened it up. And not only did I open that case up, but when I retired, the DNA firm hired me to teach DNA technology to people across the country. And I would allow people to open cases to increase their database. And down the road, we came up with John Doe warrants. We don't know who you are, but you are XXXXX,
Right.
right?
No, that's
And you're
brilliant.
indicted. Yeah. Well, I was always looking for new forensic tools. Constantly always looking for something.
You have
If I
to.
could use it, yeah, if I could use it, I'd use it.
Okay. So
Yeah,
you worked on an interesting case with a guy that burned himself to death during a voodoo ritual up in Cortlandt Park.
correct. That was I believe that was on a Saturday, and I ordinarily wouldn't be working on a Saturday, but I had so much damn paperwork. I decided to come in early on a Saturday morning to do paperwork. I no sooner walked in the door and they said, "We have something in Cortlandt Park. Looks like a person was burned to death." So I go up there and I start doing the walkthrough and reconstructing, and basically, I I really don't know what we have because it's very confusing. We had two or three scenes, and at one location, which we identified as the primary scene where the fire had started, there was a shitload of chicken feathers, and I didn't understand the significance of that. Then I had to follow the trail up the hill, and I get to up the hill, and there is the victim, basically in the pugilistic position from having burned to death. And all during this case, we get people calling up. Next thing we know, someone's making a call that they saw some people with white sheets going into the park, like this was some sort of a Ku Klux Klan
Yeah.
thing. So, oh my God, here we go. I said, no, that doesn't make any sense. Let's go back to the basics. And we identified him later on as a from the islands, Indian from the islands. In any event, I expanded the perimeter because I always expand the crime scene perimeter. And sure enough, about 75 yards away on the tree, we see these offerings, these voodoo offerings. And now I'm going back to, he came to this part of the park because this part has significance to the voodoo people. What had happened is he started the fire and with the chicken. He was going to make a sacrifice of the chicken. He became the sacrifice because the gasoline ignited him. He became a human torch. He's running up to the top of the hill and he succumbs to his injuries. And it was an accidental death, but he wasn't supposed to be the sacrifice. The chicken was
Right.
supposed to be the sacrifice.
Were you ever able to find the witnesses, or they just got the hell out of there and that was it?
There were no witnesses. People in the building called up and reported people with sheets. That turned out to be a bogus report.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Jesus, what a way to go, huh?
Yeah, that was certainly an interesting case. Horrible way to go. He was completely charred.
Didn't you have a case where a guy fed his face to the dog and then Hollywood got a hold of it and used it for Silence of the Lambs?
Yeah, yeah, that case came in. We got two calls simultaneously, one from the patrol sergeant at the scene and one from North Central Bronx requesting detectives to respond. And initially, it was reported that this person had been viciously assaulted. I stopped at the hospital first and saw that they were working on him. I went to the crime scene, and the sergeant who has working the crime scene had corralled these three dogs into the bathroom. So I said, okay, let me take a look. I'm looking at the scene. I go back to the hospital, and he is in bad condition. He has no face. He's complete. It's the weirdest thing you ever saw. Actually, he was under the influence of PCP. And under the PCP, he was kind of like, I guess, immune to some of the pain. And he took a mirror, and he smashed a mirror, and he took the shards of glass and literally peeled his entire face from his skull. Okay, it was really strange. Meanwhile, they're talking about an assault, and I'm saying, I don't see an assault here. Let me go back to the scene, and I see the smashed mirror and the dogs. I said, listen, there's no face here. We have to save face. Bring those dogs down to ASPCA. Pump their stomachs. Sure enough, as he was peeling his face, he was feeding the dogs his face. And the stomach remnants, okay, indicated pieces of flesh. Now, you can't do anything with it because the saliva and the enzymes, you can't reattach anything. I'm back at the hospital, and now they have him all gauzed up, and I try to get a statement from him. What happened to you? And all of a sudden, yeah, 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 yeah. It looked like a puppet with the mouth going up and down. Oh my God. Anyway, I forensically, that case was really unique, and I did everything I could. I followed up with the hospital and reconstructed surgery, and I did something called a pectoral flap, where they will detach the skin from the chest and grab it onto the face, and it grows with new blood vessels and veins, and they cut it back and they do it again. They were making him a new face, all right? I have all the pictures from the stage of this reconstruction and his final face and everything else. Apparently, what happened is some young intern there, when he left the hospital, decided to write a book, something about morphine and mayhem at a Bronx hospital. And he claimed that this guy was feeding his Doberman pincher and this and that, and made up a whole story. But the problem was, it was in my book, in my textbook, Practical Homicide Investigation, as a strange, equivocal death, and how you have to follow the forensics, the dog's stomachs, and everything else. This thing made me look pretty stupid. So I said, I'm sorry, we can't let this thing go. What had happened in the interim is Thomas Harris, who wrote the book Hannibal. He's down at the FBI getting information. The FBI has my textbook down there. He takes my textbook. He takes the entire case of the man who fed his face to the dogs, and he turns it into Mason Verga.
Right.
In Hannibal, right? And he used the whole thing, and I said, I'm getting calls from AP and UPI because they all know my book. Vernon, you realize that I says, no, I didn't read his book. So I decided to send him a nasty letter. I says, dear Mr. Harris, I don't know what school you went to. I got 2 master's degrees. You usually cite your sources when you do something. 6 months later, I get a Xerox copy of his apology because he thought his signature was worth money. I deeply apologize for that oversight. In all future copies, we will recognize your book, Mr. Gareth. Is that? What are you going to do? I don't sue anybody. I mean,
Yeah.
I could have sued him, but that was a strange case. It really was.
Well, speaking of strange and with the dog, didn't you also have a case on Marble Hill Avenue where the husband killed the wife, turns the gun on himself, and the Great Dane starts eating him?
Yeah, that was another sad case. Apparently, the husband was a cocaine person. He was selling drugs and everything else, but I think he was using too much of his own product because he actually believed that everybody in the building was DEA. Now, his wife, Lucy, was a nice girl, and she came from a good family, but she's hooked up with an asshole. She comes in on Friday night, and she says, hello, right? And he gets ballistic. Don't talk to anybody. They're all DEA. So nobody hears anything. On the weekend, they hear a baby crying. They call the police. Well, that means the whole weekend that little baby was in there with the rotting corpse of his mother and father. We can't get in because there is a Great Dane, and it's big, and it's nasty
Oh
because
yeah.
he taught the Great Dane to be like him, like a bastard. So the dog, so I have to call emergency service, and the only way to get in is up the fire escape. So they come in, they're up front. I let them do their job. They dart the dog. It took 4 darts to bring this son of a bitch
Yeah,
down.
they're strong.
Yeah, so we have him changed to a radiator in case he wakes up. Meantime, we rescue the baby. Poor thing was
Oh my
malnourished,
God.
right? And I get the baby out, get the baby to the hospital. In the meantime, I go into the living room. The wife's face is completely eaten by the dog. He's such a bad bastard that the dog didn't touch him even when he's dead. You know what the next meal is? The baby.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay? So the dog is waiting by the crib for the baby. He's going to eat that baby next. It was also interesting in that case. This was an example of a forensic case, a homicide-suicide. He had actually gripped the gun. It's called cadaveric spasm, in which he grips the gun in a death grip. And even after he dies, you have to literally pry the gun from his hand. So it allowed me to reconstruct that this was a homicide-suicide. He killed his wife, then he killed himself. Now, the fun of that case later on is the mother of that victim arrives. And I figure, well, this is important. This baby's been traumatized, right? I send the mother along with the baby to the hospital, okay? Let the baby have somebody from the family that can nourish her
Right.
and take her back. I get a call later today from social services at the hospital. Now, I'm really pissed about that no nonsensical death. There was no reason for this. This social worker, by whose authority did you give the baby to that woman? I said, by the authority vested in me as a squad commander. I made a determination of a homicide-suicide. That baby was in that room for 3 days with the rotting corpse of his parents, and you're asking me by what authority I gave the grandmother the baby? What are you, out of your mind?
Yeah.
You don't, I said, and if you don't like it, you report me, okay? That was, I just kind of lost it.
What a way to go. And he was so coked up and so paranoid.
Yeah, he thought everybody was a DEA agent in the building.
I don't know if you remember this one. It was September of '83. You caught a murder case on 6141 Broadway involving a gay substitute teacher, Earl Norman. He was beaten and tied up.
He wasn't tied up. He was beaten. Another case that really, really upset me because as you unfold these things, on the face of it, it looked as if this was a respectable teacher from a school in Harlem. He was also the guidance counselor. He was the organist at his Baptist church. He's discovered when someone from the church goes there on Sunday morning and finds him dead, beaten. He wasn't tied up. I'm on vacation, but I was the squad commander. I said, I don't care if I'm on vacation, if I'm off, no matter where I am, if there's a homicide, you call me. And I came in. Now, we examined the scene. It looked as if someone had rummaged through the apartment looking for cash or valuables. Looking at the crime scene, the only thing that didn't belong in there was a baseball bat. This guy was very, very effeminate. That baseball bat didn't belong there, which in my mind meant somebody brought it. So the main thing in the homicide investigation, I stress this in all my classes, the most important aspect of homicide investigation is victimology.
Right.
What was going on in that person's life at the time that he or she was killed? And many times it gives you the motives, the risk factors, etc. In this particular case, when we ran his ID, he had a Bronx sex crimes arrest from the Bronx Sex Crimes Unit. Oh, and that opens a whole different perspective. It turned out that the mother of this young boy at this school in Harlem made a complaint when she found out that this school teacher was engaging her son, buying him sneakers, and taking him on little trips. And she tried to make a report. at the 32nd precinct in Harlem where she lived, they didn't take the report. She tried to notify the school, they blew her off. So she goes to Bronx Narcotics. Bronx Narcotics makes an arrest. Bronx Narcotics notifies the school that he's a sex offender, as a guidance counselor should be removed because he has had relationships with this young boy. Well, that's not going to happen. Whatever happens in the interim, he gets a lawyer, and the case is dropped. They have to re-indict him. In the interim, the young boy is picked up again by this guy and invites him to his apartment up on Riverdale Avenue. And while he's there, he had been engaging in oral sex with this boy. Now he decides he wants to have anal sodomy with him. The boy goes nuts and he beats him with the baseball bat. He wasn't rummaging for jewelry or money. He was trying to get back the nude pictures that this guy had taken and used them to, I'm going to tell somebody, I'm going to tell somebody, I'm going to tell somebody. He was extorting him. So me and one of my detectives, we go down to the school. And an arrogant principal, arrogant SOB, obviously a racist, you will refer to me as doctor. I says, good. You'll refer to me as Detective Sergeant, and you'll refer to Mr. Cruz as Detective Cruz. He denied knowing anything about it. Very uncooperative. What we find out later, though, is while we're at the school, the kid had come back to school and found out the police were there, and he ran. We come up with information that the kid part-time is running numbers for a Harlem numbers operation. We put pressure on them. Okay, we're going to shut you down, blah, blah. We had engaged the family. The mother trusted us. I had told her, we're going to make sure that the right thing is done by your boy. I promise you, this whole story is going to come out. And as a result, we stayed in touch with her. She calls up. He's at my mother's house. He went to his grandma's house in the projects off of Harlem River Drive. I said, we're going to be right there. We'll meet you. We go down there, we get the kid. He's very docile. He's very scared. He's very upset. We bring everybody back to the 50th precinct, the grandma, the mother, and the boy. And we have a conversation. And then we advise everybody of their rights, and we get the full story. And that's how I knew what happened with the teacher. Okay, so the arrest is made. When the arrest was made, and I don't know what articles you picked up, but it was a big case because of a school teacher involved sexually with the student. Well, now the fun begins. The Board of Education is trying to say they didn't know anything about it, and they're trying to put it on us. Now the police department, I tell you one thing about the police department, the high command, they're all pussies when it comes to pressure. They bend under the Department of Board of Education, right? Well, why didn't you notify the board? Right? No, it doesn't work like that. We're homicide detectives. We're going to get the guy. One of the things I happened to say, because I want to do the right thing for the family.
Sure.
I said, so-and-so was a perfectly normal, functioning teenager until he got involved with Mr. So-and-so, who was a school teacher and sexually took advantage of him.
Sure.
Well, oh my God. Next thing I know, you ever hear of the Gay National Guard? Well,
No.
I got Colonel Moran of the Gay National Guard. He's sending me nasty letters, all kinds of crap. It was so funny. But we got him. The case was resolved. Everything was taken care of.
Did the boy go to jail?
Actually, he didn't go to jail. He went to a youth facility. All right, it was lowered. It went from homicide to something else because of the sex thing, and he did not go to jail. He was a minor.
Else Place in the 50 is a side street off of Sedgwick Avenue. It overlooks the reservoir. It's a small street, but believe it or not, there's a lot of activity there. In the 80s, former Black Panther and FBI's most wanted, Marilyn Jean Buck, had a safe house there. I walked into a homicide seconds after a husband stabbed his wife to death, and then 250 cops killed the guy in the apartment. You came across there where a woman was shot by her husband in the apartment, if you'd like to go into that a little bit.
Yeah, we got called to that case in the morning. What had happened is during the evening tour, the late tour, there was a domestic dispute between her and her estranged husband. And people called 911 to report it. Well, the unit that went there from the 50 was an old-time hairbag, useless piece of shit, with a new kid as his recorder. They pull up in front of the building. They didn't even go in. They call the radio. Anything further, Central? No, it's unfounded. And they leave. The next day, people calling hysterical. The little baby, her little baby, is walking through the hallway with blood all over her, okay, from mom. And they call, and when we arrive, they're screaming, "You effing cops are no good. You should have been here last night." And we don't know what they're talking about. We saw him shot. She's on the bed. Well, it turns out that the ex-husband had done that. He's in the wind. We're going to get him. But because of that case, the one guy is going to get suspended, and then he's going to get fired. The other kid, he was probationary. He didn't have a chance. But that was a horrible case because it made us look bad. It made it look like we didn't care, and we did care. And that never should have happened.
Yeah, it's when cops do shoddy police work. So I get you make a mistake or you overlook something or something's happened so many times that you kind of become a victim of, well, this is what it is. I've been here a million times. But when someone just failure to get out of the car and 90 exit from the street.
Well, not only that, the call came in as screams and a shot fired. Okay?
That's even worse.
It's even worse. He didn't get out of the car. Anything further, Central? No, negative. 1091. That's it.
Yeah, there's no saving those. Yeah, there's no saving them for that.
What's funny about that case, though? Internal Affairs, they got involved in it right away. And this big shot, I forget, it was a lieutenant from Internal Affairs, comes, "Let me see the crime scene." I said, "You can't go in the crime scene." "Sergeant, I don't give a shit who you are. It's a crime scene." And was processing the crime scene for microscopic evidence. So you can't go in. You can do your investigation using the 911 tapes. You don't need to be in the scene. You just want to take a look at the nude body. That's unbelievable.
Another homicide you had, this is up in Highbridge, was two teenage girls that tortured a guy in his bathtub.
Yeah, that was when I was in Homicide. Oh, that was a horrible case. That was the bathtub torture case. I remember that case very well. We got a call, Homicide 4-4 precinct, got a guy in a tub. Respond to the scene, and the water in the tub is bloody. We don't know the extent of what's going on. He was tortured. It turns out that he was a working man. He went to the local diner, and he's having his meal. And a couple of the street girls come in, and next thing you know, they want to go to his apartment and smoke a little marijuana. So he's, "Hey, maybe I'm going to get lucky, right?" He doesn't know they're being set up. He goes back to the apartment, and one of the girls says, "Oh, I'd like to get some more smoke." So he gives her some money. She goes out. When she comes back, she doesn't secure the fox lock. This guy was very conscious of robberies and push-ins. What happens is she diverts his attention, and next thing you know, in come a group, 5 of them, right? Thugs come in, and they start beating him up and torch. Now they bind him, and they're asking for his money, okay? And they figure he has a stash because he's a working person.
Right, he's got money.
In the mentality of these street shits, if somebody works, they have money, right? Anyway, to make a long story short, there was no money. So you know what they do? They're going to start stealing furniture. They're carrying shit out. This happened to be one of the nice buildings in the area. Jehovah's Witnesses live there, and people who are religious, and they're watching this, and they call the police. That's how the police get there, but they're already gone. In my mind, I'm saying to myself, this case, this is a street case. These are street girls. As I'm doing the process in the crime scene with my detectives, at this point, I have a major case. I notify the command. I want all detectives working to respond. Canvass the building. I want as much information. We were there for hours. While we were there was a shooting at Ogden Avenue. Another homicide. 2 people shot, 1 dead, 1 injured in the hospital. So I sent the night march. I said, "You guys go, because I'm still here." Unbeknownst to us at the time, those cases are related. The dispute was over what was taken from the apartment, who got what. All right? So now the bad guys are like shooting each other for proceeds. Ironically, in the apartment was $1,000 worth of tools. But what would these shitheads know about tools? They don't work, okay? That was a very valuable product because the man's a working man. We linked the 2 cases together. Next thing you know, we have an informant comes into the game. And the informant is being handled by the lieutenant. Now, I don't want to sound nasty, but he never had an informant before, so he thinks this is a big deal. He doesn't know the informant's playing him. We're getting information, we're putting it together. We come up with the street name of the girl. One of the people in the apartment recognized one of the girls from school. So we get the yearbook, we identify her. So now we have an identification of one of the girls. Meanwhile, we get the name of the other, the street name. She's living in Brooklyn. And she hangs out in the Bronx, but she lives in Brooklyn. Again, we get her. The mother is cooperating with us because she's like a runaway. I have to send Brooklyn Anti-Crime to that address to get her, to bring her in with the mother. And she gives it up, but they're laughing. They think it's a big joke. Well, now we got the two girls under arrest. We know who two of the male players are, and we're going to go after them. In the meantime, everybody knows that this case is going down. These guys are getting ready to leave town. The lieutenant's informant, okay, he won't talk to anybody except the lieutenant, tells him that, oh yeah, they're going to Georgia, and they're on a bus on their way to Georgia right now, and they're staying in New Jersey to avoid the police. Before they went to New Jersey, they did a stick-up of a numbers place in Mount Vernon, where they got money, that's right, so for the trip. We're of the belief that they're on the way to Georgia, Augusta, Georgia. So I make a decision that we're going to intercept them. So I put out an alarm, okay, to the Georgia authorities. We know the bus is supposed to stop in Augusta at a certain time. Me and this other detective, we get raced out to JFK. We move at 90 miles an hour. We just know this is before, like, you had to take your shoes off and shit, right? We get on the plane. We go, all right, we're on our way to Atlanta, Georgia, all right, to switch to the other plane for Augusta. We meet the Augusta authorities. Well, they put together a team that they were out to do damage. You should see these guys. They have machine guns, vests, none of the shit that we have in New York. And the bus is supposed to come there. The Greyhound bus is supposed to come to the bus terminal. So they're at the bus terminal. I'm saying, oh my God, I hope they're not on the bus because they're going to be dead. The FBI is going to lock us up. We're down in Georgia. Turns out it was a false lead. Nobody shows up. We go back to the police station. They opened up the evidence locker. We have a couple drinks, go to breakfast the next morning, come back, and now I'm in a shitload of trouble for jumping on a plane going. In the meantime, we have one of the male suspects under arrest, and he's talking. The informant, okay, now calls and says, the lieutenant's not in. Well, I want to speak to the lieutenant. I said, he ain't speaking to anybody. You sent me to Georgia. He's in Rikers Island on an unrelated charge. He wants to get out from under. He said, we're not talking to you. No, I'm going to tell you where they really went. Okay, so we go to Rikers Island. In the meantime, the charge on this guy in Rikers, the DA from the Bronx says no one can speak to him. I said, well, that doesn't apply to me because I'm talking to him about a homicide. I'm talking about the case that he's under arrest for. So I tell the detective, don't worry about it. I'll take this. We go there, and he says, no, they're really going to California. They left on such and such time, and they're on their way to Los Angeles. So now I go back, and I'm going to now tell them that I have to go to fucking California. They're ready to kill me. I just came back from Georgia. Thank God, the captain working that night, Captain John Planska, he's a detective-oriented captain. He saw this. He knew this informant was playing the lieutenant. I put another teletype out, okay, that they're on their way to California. So the guy at the phone said, didn't you send a teletype the other day to Georgia? I said, yeah, it was a mistake. They're really going to California. During the night watch, the information comes in. The bus arrives in California. LAPD's there to meet the bus. They're not on the bus. I'm saying, holy shit, this is really getting bad. I'm looking like a real jackass. Screw that lieutenant's informant, I'm going to kill him. Turns out the bus stopped in Indio, California. These three mutts, okay, from the Bronx, decide to do an armed robbery in Indio, California. They're the only blacks in Indio. Everybody else is Hispanic, right? The one guy gets caught, right? When they see the teletype, I said, there's two more. Sure enough, they're hiding in town. We pick them up, so now they have them in custody. So I called the district attorney. Are you going to indict? No, you had no business to. I said, I didn't ask you that. Are you going to extradite? Because if you're not going to extradite, I got to know. No, you shouldn't have talked to him. I did. Listen, let me explain something to you. You're such a smart ass. You know the law. I didn't speak to him about the case that he's under arrest. I spoke to him about a homicide. Now, if you can't make this decision, call your boss and tell us if you're going to extradite, because we got to move quick. They're holding him in California. He reluctantly agrees. So now the next day, lieutenant comes in. Vernon, I'll be going to California. I says, you going to California? What do you know about the case? No, I'm going to go to California. He talks to the captain. The captain says, no, you're not going to California. Sergeant Gebbett's going to California. It's his case. He knows the case. So he says, well, we can't pay overtime. And if your team wants to go, they have to take a chart change. But he doesn't know that my troops are loyal to me. Every one of my detectives said, we'll take a chart change, no overtime. So we went to California, got them, put them into custody, and we're going to bring them back. I get some publicity out there from California, because this India, California, got these 3 guys under arrest. They wanted in the Bronx for homicide. This is a big case. So they take a picture of me and my detectives. The best part of the story is when we get back to New York, one of my detectives had a bullshit IAD complaint that he done something, police corruption. And the day he did it, he's in California with me. I says, I'll be testifying at the grand jury for you. Let's bring the newspapers.
So he was covered.
That was a wild case. It was like a national manhunt.
So how many players were involved in that homicide ultimately?
Well, five males and 2 females.
Speaking of Cortlandt Park, you had another one, the Scolan case. Could you go into that a little bit?
Yes, I can. I got called at home by my night watch. It was Christopher Scolan. Yeah, that was a sad case. I got called from my night watch. It came in almost at midnight. Him and his 2 friends, went to Catholic school, and they're out walking like most kids. It's nighttime, okay, it's a weekend, and they got a radio, and they see some campfires in Cortlandt Park. They thought maybe there's some friends they know. Well, it turns out it's not their friends, it's a badass group from South Yonkers. Kids walk in there, next thing you know, they're surrounded. They grab the radio from Christopher Scolan, that's his brother's radio, and they throw it into the fire. The other kid gets beat up and they knock him down the hill. Kid runs away. The last words out of Christopher Scolan was, I got to get my brother's radio back. And he's stabbed. And he lays on the ground, he dies, he's out. Horrible case. I come in, we at the crime scene under control, there's nobody there. Everybody ran. When the kid got stabbed, everybody goes. Well, since it's Yonkers, and we're on the borderline of 5-0 and Yonkers. The lower end of Yonkers has the shitheads. For the 5-0, we got the Cortlandt Park, so a lot of stuff happens. I tell the detectives, let's get a hold of Yonkers Patrol, because they know they're badasses. Okay, they're probably from there. The other kid gives a statement and tells a story how they were happening, and I have the unenviable task of telling the family that their son is dead. And I'll never forget that, because I went there with a detective and we told him, your son has been killed in the park. I'm very sorry. We're going to be working this case through the night. Can you make the identification of the body next day? I'll make sure someone's there with you, but we're working this case. Well, the Yonkers cops were great. They start rounding people up, and they're all scumbags. And we got him, we question him, and we find out exactly who the perp is, who did what. We identify the stabber, and we go to his place in Yonkers, and he reluctantly surrenders. And the bloody knife is found under the porch, the knife he used. Everything's going fine when all of a sudden a Yonkers patrol sergeant arrives and starts a whole rash of shit. You guys from New York, you screwed me on the Son of Sam case. You're not taking anybody back to the city. There's our arrest. It's in Yonkers, New York. I'm saying, slow down. The body's in the Bronx, okay? The perpetrator lives here. This is a joint investigation. What charges you have on him? That's not the point. You guys screwed me with the Son of Sam. I wasn't there for the Son of Sam, okay? I was someplace else. Let me tell you how this is going to go down. He's a suspect in a murder. The murder took place in the Bronx. I'm going to make sure that the Yonkers authorities get full credit for assisting us in this. And he reluctantly agrees. And we bring him back, and we identify the second person who's involved, and the arrest is made. That sergeant became my best friend in Yonkers, because we had a lot of cases on the border of the Bronx and Yonkers. He became our best buddy, because he was written up in the newspaper. His name was there. I don't know what happened with the Son of Sam case. Whatever it was, you never know with personalities. Anyway,
Right.
we got him. The saddest part about that case is years later, I forget where I am, but I have a body up at one of the colleges on the Hudson River. and I arrive by myself because the people were already there, detectives are there. I arrive in my unit, and I meet a security guard. He goes, "Oh, you're here for the homicide." He says, "By the way, Mr. Gebert, we pray for you all the time. Thank you very much for what you did for our family." I look at this guy and I see his name tag, Scolan. He aged like 20 years. This was the father of the child. And here he is praying for me. I'm praying for you. God, terrible. You know how these things come back, but that's what that case stands out in my mind.
When you interviewed the killer, what did he say? What was his reason?
No, he didn't say anything. He said, "I stabbed him." Big deal. It was like nothing.
Did he not know he killed him?
Well, he didn't know until we came to his house. But as far as he was concerned, like when this went down, Vic, everybody scattered. Somebody knew something bad had happened.
Yeah.
They didn't know he was dead. So he admitted to stabbing him. Oh, he's dead?
Probably out by now.
Yeah, probably.
You were involved in on the Major Deegan Expressway cuts through the 50 precinct, and just before the 233rd Street exit, you have on either side of the highway. There were mobile stations. I don't know who owns them now, but for us, when I was on patrol on the 4 to 12s, what we would do is you had a lot of people, a lot of guys from Westchester County would come down into Washington Heights or the Bronx. They would buy drugs. Some were actually big-time dealers. And what they would do is they would cop in the Bronx or Washington Heights, and on their way back to upstate New York or Yonkers, Westchester County, they would pull into that gas station, the gas station on the north side, pull off into the side, and open up either A, to get high, or B, to see, if the count was right, did they get beat? So what we used to do on the 4 to 12s, we used to go flying into that gas station with the lights off, flashlights in hand, pull right up on those cars parked off to the side and jump out with our flashlights. And there was a couple of times I caught guys with ounces of coke or a pound of weed in the car. They were just, all right, well, what do we got? And the next thing you know, there's 2 cops standing on either side of your car. But I always thought that those gas stations were primed to get stuck up. Why? Because you could just ride in.
Well, there was a working telephone at that gas
Yes.
station, a public phone. And so what would happen is people would pull off either to use the phone or whatever, and there was a robbery team working out of the Bronx and Harlem. And actually, they were citywide. And one night, there was an off-duty corrections officer had stopped to use the phone, and they came out at him with guns. He shot one, and they shot him. And he went down. They took him down. Thank God he lived. He survived.
Good.
So I get called at home because I come in right away. Any cases like that, it's not a homicide, but it sounds like it's going to be. And we interview him in the hospital. He's a good witness. He's going to be okay. He swears he shot one of them. So, of course, we do the routine, check all the hospitals. But sure enough, we got a hospital in Manhattan as a guy claims he was shot during a robbery. And he's sticking to his story. Well, that's okay. My detectives are good. They're going to work on him a little bit. Next thing you know, his story's not holding any water, and he's one of the perps. So I send out an all points bulletin, okay? We not only have this case, we got 3 cases here at the 233rd Street. We got 2 in Queens. We got 1 someplace else. This was a citywide robbery team. And there's a woman and 2 guys, or 1 guy. So what happens is the guy in the hospital, he finally gives up, but he doesn't give us much information. He gives her name Bertha, right? She's in Harlem someplace. Well, my guys go down to Harlem. They talk to the 2-8 squad, the 3-2 squad. Oh, yeah, we know who she is, right? Well, so they're riding down the street, and she has very distinctive, she's very fat, distinctive look. So one of my detectives, they go, "Hey, Bertha!" She turns around. "Don't move, you're under arrest." They grab her. They bring her into the precinct. She's in the holding cell, and she puts on this act that she's having a medical emergency. And she's rolling around the floor and shit. So,
Right.
Well, we could call an ambulance. She's having a medical emergency. She's still got the stolen credit cards on her, and she's stashing them in the seat in the holding cell. Oh. So now we not only have the proceeds of the immediate robbery, we have the proceeds of the person who couldn't ID anybody. He's got his credit cards. So it was a good arrest. We locked them up for 3 robberies in the Bronx, and they charged in Manhattan, and was a good case.
Those gas stations, man. I always used to say that, like they didn't really get robbed much when I was there, but I came across that and I found that interesting that you actually had a case up there.
Yeah.
Do you remember a hit and run with a 17-year-old victim, William Carlo, at West 242nd Street and Broadway?
Certainly do. Another sad case. Young man, his father was a fireman in Yonkers, a good kid. He's out with his friends like most kids, all right? And it's a night watch case. Came in on the night watch, but it was in the 5-0. And I get called at home because he's dead. It wasn't a hit and run. It was a deliberate murder. The person driving that car saw that kid. He made a U-turn and turned around and came at him full speed, hitting him, knocking him over the car,
Jesus.
right? Stops, they look back, they take off. So this wasn't a hit and run, this was a murder. So we have the witness, we have the kid who was with him. I put out a public appeal. Of course, I spoke to his parents. I told them we'll do everything we can. The public appeal went out. Now, in my mind, I'm saying 3 people didn't commit this murder. Okay? The driver committed the murder. I am sure that the other people in that car are shitting in their pants.
Sure. What
the hell did you do? Right? So I put out the appeal with the mother's talk about her son and Westchester papers. In the meantime, the witness saw something, saw the car, but couldn't get the plate number, but described some sort of white material. So I decided, let me use one of my forensic techniques. I call up the department hypnotist. Let's hypnotize the witness and see if we can get the plate number or something else. Well, the hypnotist was able to come up with the fact that there was this white material on the bumper of the car, okay, that nobody talked about. Under hypnosis, we got the information. Now the father of one of the kids that's in the car tells his dad what happened. Says, you're going to call the police. He calls up the precinct, all right? I'm Mr. So-and-so. My son was in that car. We're going to be right there. We go to White Plains, New York. Interview the kid. He's a good witness. Meanwhile, I got the Bronx district attorney, right? I says, listen, these are witnesses, not suspects. Okay, we need them. So I want you to authorize us to get a search warrant for the car. The car was brought to a body shop, a friend of theirs, and to repair the window, because the broken window,
sure.
the windshield where the kid went over the car. And at the body shop, right, we recovered the car was fixed. We recovered the broken window. I see the car. The white material was actually rope where he had tied the bumper. He had his previous accident. And the rope was the white material, so that was great. So we have that. We have the suspect, and we go to his house. We arrest him in White Plains, New York, and we bring him back. And of course, the family was very happy that we solved the case, but it won't bring their son back. But she wrote a nice letter to the police commissioner, thanking us for our concern and everything else. But that was an interesting case because it was going to be written off as a hit and run. That's not a hit and run. This is a deliberate murder.
What was the motivation? Why did he do it?
Drunkenness and arrogance. No motivation. This was not premeditated. It was deliberate. There's a difference. It was a spur of the moment. Let's fuck this guy.
Oh my
Just like
God.
that. Just like that.
17 years old.
Yeah, shame. I had a couple interesting cases on Night Watch. I didn't get Night Watch that often. I get it like every other month. I'd get Night Watch duty. But I liked it because sometimes there'd be an interesting case, and sometimes it was just very, very disgusting. But I have a couple other Night Watch cases I'll tell you about. But this one case that comes in at 7:50 a.m., 10 minutes to go.
I was going to say.
Dragging my ass, I'm ready to go home, right? Newspaper girl, assaulted and raped in the 4-3 precinct on a roof landing. So let's go, here we go. So we go there, and we arrive at the scene. Speaking to the patrol sergeant, she's at the hospital. She got ripped up, her internals. She's stabbed in the stomach, and horrible, horrible injuries. She's critical. So they show me the crime scene where they believe it took place. And I'm saying, this doesn't make any sense that this guy is going to follow her. I used to deliver newspapers when I was a kid. And when I went to the building, what I would do is I go on one side and go up the building and deliver the papers. I'd cross over the roof and come down the other side to deliver the other papers. That's a newspaper routine, okay? I said, let me walk the crime scene. Sure as shit, I find the original scene where she was assaulted and physical evidence. That's exactly what happened. He was waiting for her on the roof landing for her to come
Oh,
up. He had seen her
yeah.
before. So when she came up, that's where the assault took place. She managed to get across to the other side, okay, where she knocked on the door and then she collapsed and fainted. Well, and I bring the 4-3 squad in and bring everybody else. I call the chief at home. Chief says, all Bronx detectives respond to that. He was big on that, which was good, okay?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
full court press. Not only do we have a young female victim of a sex crime, but she's delivered in the Daily News. You know this is going to be a big story.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't get anybody that night, but the physical evidence that I retrieved at the other crime scene will be matched to him through DNA. Well, the DNA from blood type. That
Jesus.
was,
Did she recover?
yes, she did recover. And both her and her brother would deliver papers every morning at 6 o'clock in the morning. I mean, good kids doing the right thing,
Right.
then going to school.
Yeah, for people that don't know what night watch is, usually NYPD squads they go into tour about 1 a.m. and each borough has a night watch, which is usually it's like a team of detectives that basically are on call for whatever happens, and they start the preliminary investigation of anything.
Right. And if it's a serious case, we bring people in from home from the day shift at the precinct of occurrence, which I've done before. Another interesting case, these cases night watch, we get a report of a body on the roof in the 4-6 precinct. It's an abandoned building. Now, you and I both know those buildings really aren't abandoned. They're abandoned by the landlord.
Right.
Okay? All right? If they're getting electricity, they're hooking up an extension cord to the building next door. That'll be the next building to go under. They get their water from the fire hydrant to bring the water in, they truck it in. Anyway, I get to this location. No lights, right? Semi-abandoned building. There's people living there. There's squatters living there. Then they're paying rent. There's a lot of abandoned buildings in my life, in narcotics and in patrol and TPF. You don't run into these frickin' buildings because some of these buildings are booby trapped. So we're coming in the building. We got our flashlights in one hand and the guns in the other. If anybody goes boo, we go bang. Okay, that's the kind of place it is. We get to the roof landing. There's a guy with his pants open, a victim with his pants open, laying back, who's got cheap jewelry on. And the reporting witness and his wife are there to talk to us. And she says, my husband went up to the roof to take a piss. And he bumped into something. And he lit a match. And he saw that it was Willie, the resident homosexual. So he came down to get me. We better call the police. So I'm saying there's two problems with that story. Number one, if you bumped into something in the middle of the night, you don't light a match, you run like hell in the opposite direction. Number two, how long can you handle a match? All right? Not too long, and there's no match there. So now I'm put together, this guy's involved. His wife's involved as his witness, okay? I said, all right, I get one of my detectives, Willie Brown. I said, Willie, talk to this lady and explain to her what's going on. It was that son of a bitch. I knew he was up to no good. I saw him drinking beer on the stoop with him later. I know he was up there. There goes his witness. She's common law, so she can testify against him. But that whole case was broken. But a simple equation, all right? Knowing your abandoned buildings, knowing what the dynamics are, and who your victim is.
So we were able to solve it.
Oh yeah.
What was the
Yeah.
motivation?
Well, he was getting blowjobs from the local homosexual.
Willie.
Yeah, and the local homosexual said to him, if you don't meet me on the roof, I'm going to tell your wife what you're doing. So he says, I got to kill him now. Life is cheap in the Bronx.
It's funny you talk about light and match. There was a guy, was in the 4-2, ran into an abandoned building. They always used to tell the story why you should carry a flashlight. A guy chased a perp into an abandoned building and didn't have a flashlight. So he pulled the lighter out of his pocket, and when he lit it, he had his gun in one hand and the lighter in the other. And when he lit it, the guy's face was literally, and the guy blew out the light. The guy panicked and squeezed the trigger and shot the guy in the stomach.
Let me tell you something about these abandoned buildings. For the most part, they're not abandoned. You either got crazy people that were released
Oh,
when
yeah.
they should have been held, or you got drug dealers. Now, the drug dealers many times will use the building to sell drugs. The building, maybe the front was cemented up. They'll have a hole. They take the money through the hole, pass the drugs out, and they're kind of immune from the police enforcement. Other times, what they'll do is they'll take out a stairwell, say on the third floor, and if you chase them into the building and there's no lights, when they get to the third floor, they grab the balustrade and swing over to the next landing. You're chasing them, you go right down into the basement, probably on spikes. So knowing about these booby traps and things like that, because, and even like escaping across from one roof to the other, sometimes they'll put a plank, one of those real thick 10 by 4s, right, across, that they can run across to the next building, and then they pull it across, you can't chase them. Okay, so there's a lot of sneaky shit that goes on with buildings. I tell people don't ever run into an abandoned building. Be prepared, okay? Because you might get yourself hurt.
Yeah, it's their home. They know the rules in there. They know what's going on. You're right.
Yeah.
Like when I was a young cop in the 4-2 and the 4-1, you're right. They would come in from the back of an abandoned building. They would punch a hole out in the front, and they would just sell. It was a hole in the wall, and you would put in $5, and you would get crack. And I remember the 4-1 guys would pull up and spray mace in the hole. You'd hear them screaming. And then there was a couple of guys in the 4-1 that would throw cherry bombs and M80s in there, and you'd hear them screaming. You'd see like a flashbang in there. And then they would stop for a while, and then they would punch a hole somewhere else or to the side of the building. You know what it's like. It's cat and mouse with these guys.
And you got to be ready. You got to be prepared. You just don't run into those blind. Same with ammunition on the roofs. Like when I was in TPF, first thing we did, we'd turn out, and it was in a high crime precinct, the 4-1, the 4-2, the 4-8, the 4-0. And what we do is, when we turn out, instead of going to post, we go into the back of the building, go up the fire escape, check the roofs, get all the rocks, bricks, and all the ammunition that was lined up, get it off the roof, okay? And when you walk close to the building. You didn't walk out by the sidewalk because they could get you. So these are little tricks of the trade and working in the ghetto. There's some of the ghetto entertainment. I remember one night, like I was a TPF sergeant, and it is ghetto entertainment. So what happens is the firemen respond to 4-1 and the Seabury and 172th Street, okay? And if you bring a ladder truck into that location, it's difficult to maneuver the hook and ladder in that intersection. Anyway, what they did, Saturday night, the radio's blasted. There's all kinds of shit going on. They had like 16 jobs backed up. I have 3 squads of TPF cops there, and we're backing up the precinct. Not for aided cases or for crime, radio runs. So what happens is the firemen are under attack. They're calling for police reinforcement, police protection. They're being bombarded from the roof with these animals because they started a bonfire in front of one of the buildings. The firemen come in. Next thing you know, they're getting hit with bricks and bottles from the roof. So we come in and clear it out. We clear the roofs, and everything's under control. But they're not finished yet. They want to entertain themselves some more. So next thing they call it a 1013. Okay, at Seabury on the 1013. I get on the radio. TPF supervisor at the scene with the 4-1 supervisor do not have any units respond to this location. These are bogus runs. Then another one comes, cop needs assistance at this location. So I said, okay, we're gonna handle this TPF style. I get my squad, says, listen, what you're gonna do, you're gonna go up there and you're gonna clear the roofs, okay? But before we do that, I'm gonna have aviation come in with helicopters. And what we're gonna do, we'll do like an aerial strike on the roofs. So I identify myself as TPF commander at the scene. Request aviation to send helicopters to this location, right? The rooftop, we have a big crowd on the roof. So they come in with a helicopter. They light up the roofs, and these mutts scatter all over the place. So while they're scattering, I have my guys go back into the building next door, rappel down to that roof, and wait. Now we wait about an hour. And they're working their way back into the roofs, right? Aviation, when you send those units back, we have another, the aviation unit comes in with the helicopter. They try to scramble the loose, they run right into the arms of my TPF cops. They're sentenced on the spot, okay, right? Coca-Cola, shampoo. But the three main guys, we got them. They made Molotov cocktails. They had bottles of gasoline up there with rock salt in it. So when you threw the bottle down, the rock salt would spread out and stick to you. So now I call for the bomb squad. Right? It's a bomb. So TPF commander scene, I want the bomb squad to respond. So this is going over the radio, right? So captain comes up from Manhattan. Where's the lieutenant? I said, there ain't no lieutenant. Who called for the aviation of the bomb squad? I said, I did. I'm out of here. He goes back to Manhattan. So the next day, there's a big to do with the news media because there's bomb squad, aviation. And I could add a little bit flavor to it. So yeah, the TPF rappelled down, and. Anyway, I get called down to headquarters to TPF. Seago was TPF. What's this I hear when the Bronx you were calling for help? So I tell them the story. Well, as a result of that, they said, well, sergeants on patrol can call for SOD to respond if it necessitates. You don't need a higher ranking person to do that. But that was really funny.
Well, you got to think. You're right, and you got to think outside the box.
And they were sentenced properly.
Well, it's people don't realize, and I've said this before, like especially like housing projects and stuff. You're a cop and you pull up and there's a dispute or whatever, drug sales. You've got about 3 to 4 minutes to make a decision. Someone's going to jail, or it's time to get the hell out of here. Because what happens is they start going up on the roofs and airmail, like you said, and whatever you can imagine, batteries, potted plants, Molotov cocktails, like you said,
Whatever they got.
Whatever, yeah, especially at night, and you don't know what window, what roof it came off of, and you can get killed very
Let me
easily.
tell you something. It's very deceiving to people who are not aware of the potential for these abandoned buildings. Like when I was in a taxi truck, I was out in Brooklyn. I had a black partner. He would take the arrests in Brooklyn. I would take the arrests in the Bronx. We would split the Manhattan arrests because I don't want to go to Brooklyn. He don't want to go to the Bronx. So we had a good deal. We were responded to this one location in Brooklyn. And it looks like blocks, like the Bronx, blocks of abandoned buildings. He says to me before we pull up, he says, don't be deceived by those abandoned buildings. There are people in there. Sure as shit, we made an arrest. They came out of the building like cockroaches. Right? We had 2 or 3 seconds to get in and get out, and we did. And people don't realize the potential and the danger. And then you try to explain this to the people in headquarters or people at CCRB, why you did what you did. They have no clue. All right.
Well, and for me, as a rookie cop, I mean, I grew up in the Bronx, but not the South Bronx. And I remember, like, very early on with the abandoned buildings, and the 4-2 was filled with them on Fulton Avenue off the Cross Bronx. And I remember learning that at a certain time of the day, like in the winter, as the sun went down, the sun would reflect, like, go through the buildings, and you'd see people in there. Like, during the day, you couldn't really see it, but as the sun set or rose, you could see what was going on in there, and it was like, holy shit, like there's like a whole ecosystem going on in there.
Well, anyway.
All right, so Vernon, I want to thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Could you please tell us the name of your book and where my listeners can find it?
Well, it's The Godfather of Homicide, 2nd edition, Cop's Cop. It's on Amazon. You'll find it on my author page because most of my books are textbooks. This is a legacy book about my career and was done for my grandkids, and hopefully they'll read it. But basically, it tells about how I got to be this international homicide expert because it didn't happen overnight. I got a lot of stuff in my background. I got multiple master's degrees. I'm a fellow in the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. I wrote articles for Law and Order magazine. Got a bunch of letters after my name says I'm smart. But I'm the same son of a bitch I was 50 years ago. I didn't let higher education corrupt me, okay? So I'm one of the good guys.
Definitely are. Vernon, thank you again.
All right, thank you. Take care.
As always, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in, especially my listeners in Brooklyn, New York, Grass Valley, California, Fresno, California, Spruce Grove, Alberta, Hobart, Tasmania, home of the Tasmanian Devil, and Roseland, New Jersey. If you work in law enforcement and have an interesting criminal background, please drop me a note on Twitter or Instagram at VicFerrari50. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe button. If you enjoy the content, check out my Amazon author page. Just type in my name, Vic, Ferrari like the car, where you can preview all my NYPD books for free. Thanks again, and I'll have another episode out next week.